Welcome all. Good morning, good afternoon to wherever you are. So, welcome to the next set of conversations on all equity matters. So, this week we are back to be talking about ESOPs. Um, and we're talking about a very relevant topic around ESOPs, which is related to ESOP communication and education, something I think doesn't get talked as often or as much. So we are making an effort to talk about its importance and talk the various aspects and nuances around how to communicate ESOPs better. And I don't need to talk a lot about ESOPs. It's becoming a very ubiquitous instrument, well known. Companies across stages are adopting it, and hence it becomes even more important to talk about them to your employees, communicate them, talk about the instrument, value creation it can create for the employees, and so on and so forth. So to do this, I have Vikram with me, Vikram Sivaraman. He's our country head for India and Southeast Asia, as country head for India and the Middle East at Qapita. So welcome, Vikram, to this conversation.
Pleasure to connect, Shrikant.
Great. And so, Vikram, like this is a conversation, right? So I'll throw some questions at you on this topic. We'll also see we can also keep it engaging as the audience tunes in on this and asks their question. And we've called this conversation on ESOP education and communication, right? So before we talk about ESOP communication, first let's touch upon how ESOPs have evolved over a period of time, or any other long-term incentives or equity compensation instruments, however you want to call it. What has your experience been being in the space for the last 15 years?
Great. So it's interesting to see the evolution of ESOPs, as a structure, as an incentivization construct. I think all of us, or people maybe in my age bracket, would have probably heard of ESOPs maybe in the early 2000s. The first wave of wealth creation through ESOPs, when the IT services, the large IT services majors today, when some of them went public, Infosys, Wipro, etc. I think that is where we got to hear these stories about how the employees at these companies, through the form of this instrument called ESOPs, actually created a lot of personal wealth for themselves over the course of the 2000s, the late 2000s, and maybe the early post 2010. We could see a lot of this wealth actually translating into newer companies. So employees of these large majors coming out, starting other services companies, some of them starting product companies, and getting into that construct. I think that is around the time when the startup, ecosystem was taking off in India, with Flipkart and with Snapdeal and all the other e-commerce majors, and the quantum of capital flowing into these sort of companies. That is when there was a bit of a transition in terms of thinking about ESOPs, where ESOPs earlier used to be primarily an incentive mechanism at listed companies, or at least the perception was that your company should institute all of this, and it becomes relevant only if you have a plan for listing, and only when you actually are close to executing that plan. From that construct, I think it moved to a construct where it became a key element of attracting and retaining talent at unlisted companies and startups as well. So that is one, let's say, a bit of a shift in the way ESOPs, or all of us perceive ESOPs, or the way companies also perceive ESOPs over the last maybe 15 years, 20 years or so. A few other elements of it, the traditional, sort of thinking around ESOPs, it's an element for compensating key management personnel. People who can genuinely drive value in the business and who can take some of that value back for themselves in the form of ESOPs. Now, that thinking is changing to say that it's an instrument to promote employee ownership in a lot of cases with new age companies at a very broad level. So it's not just I'm a maybe 50-year-old executive, I'm a CEO of a certain company, I'm looking to make wealth with ESOPs. Now I'm a 25-year-old or a 30-year-old. I'm young. I have the ability to take risk. I believe in ESOPs. I believe in the long-term upside of the company where I'm working. I actually go and negotiate and say, why, like, enough for my cash, but why don't you give me more equity upside? So we're seeing more of those conversations take place as well. Great news for founders and for companies, because it really aligns employees with what the entire journey, on the entire journey in some sense. And it's
Right.
also being used to signal ownership. So even a junior person In a lot of these companies, founders have said we want to go for 100% coverage. We want to make sure everybody working in our company has some element of equity ownership. So even a person at let's say a junior level can see this wealth creation journey, and actually, if an exit event happens at some point of time, can see realization on that exit event as well. So I think things have changed a bit from the time ESOPs were first introduced in the Indian market to where it stands right now. But it's a change in the right direction. It is fostering more wealth creation potential for employees. It's fostering more, more of an ownership culture among employees
Great.
rather than just behaving like a person who's just being paid a fixed salary.
Great. No, that's wonderful to note, and I think it's a win-win instrument, like you said, right? And works both ways for the company and for the employees, and it's becoming more common, like you just said, and hence perhaps it's also the right time to for us to talk about or evangelize about ESOP education, communication more. And let's kind of go into that topic specifically now because that's the discussion for today. So why it's important right now, for us to really talk about ESOP education, ESOP communication now, and what role maybe we are also playing. But yeah, why don't you go with the first question first? Yeah.
So ESOPs as a construct it's an incentive scheme to attract retain employees. So the key requirement for an ESOP scheme to be successful is an employee has to perceive value in it. Now, for a company, the way the company looks at it, there is a cost, an accounting cost, maybe an upfront cash cost as well in terms of setup, administration, in terms of rolling out an ESOP scheme. Now, the cost has to be commensurate with the value which the company is getting out of it. And that value is dependent on how employees perceive it. So I have to see that this construct of ESOPs is adding value to me as an employee in a company. If I don't have that belief, and if I don't, then I'm not going to be motivated by the ESOPs, and then the purpose basically fails. Now, perception for employees is going to be based on two things. I will perceive value if I perceive growth. So, do I really believe that I have been given ESOPs worth a certain quantum today? Now, do I believe that this quantum can actually grow 2x, 3x, 5x, and 10x in the next maybe 3 to 4 to 5 years or so? Do I really have that belief? And this is tied into the growth of the overall company itself. So that's one element of it. The perception is also in today's world is also being hinged on liquidity now. So it's not enough if growth happens. Can I actually see some cash coming out of these ESOPs for me in periodic intervals at some point of time? If the construct is that it has to be, at an IPO, or if it's going to take like 10 years, 12 years, then again, that's too long a time frame for employees to appreciate, and their perceived value may not be high, even if the company is doing well, even if their net worth has increased in the form of these ESOPs. So employees need to perceive value. I think that's a critical element of it, which means the role the company has to play in terms of ensuring that this value is perceived. That's where the education and communication angle comes in. So I would say very critical to actually focus on this. We have seen companies where the objective was really rolling out an ESOP scheme. But that's not the objective. The objective is to actually retain and motivate your employees, which means not just rolling out the scheme, but ensuring that employees keep understanding it, perceiving value in it. That's very, very important. So you're on mute, Rashid.
Yeah, perfect. No, makes a lot of sense, and that kind of reinforces the importance of now, education and communication. And we coined the discussion also as education and communication, right? But you want to decode on why are we discussing both of these? Why are both of these important? And perhaps education first and then communication later. So you want to talk a little about that as well, and you also kind of engage actively with companies on both of these aspects, so you can share some of your experiences as well.
So I would have a slightly different view. I think both are very continuous activities. Education and
Okay,
communication
wonderful.
has to happen in a continuum. Uh, yeah, I mean, once you kickstart things, a basic level of education being imparted on how ESOPs work, etc., is important. But it's also a dynamic field. Practices keep changing, regulations keep changing, things like tax keeps changing. So it's an ongoing element for both company, HR, sort of administrators and employees to keep abreast of what is happening in the ESOP domain. But at a very, at a very high level, a very simple way in which I split these two concepts is uh, more at a broader level in terms of understanding how ESOPs work as an instrument, why they are relevant, and the key elements of things like taxation. Although I would say the macro factors surrounding ESOPs. One can say this is education, right? This is not specific to any company. This could be specific to a region. So ESOP taxation, ESOP regulations may be different across multiple different geographies. But to understand the macro surrounding ESOPs, I think that's where the education comes in. Communication is more specific to the company. Now the employee may understand ESOPs. Now, what does the company's ESOP program mean for that employee? How much have I got? When is my vesting happening? What is the value? How have I seen the value creation grow? What is the potential for liquidity? Is there anything in the horizon? How is the company growing? So it's not necessarily that the engagement and the communication is restricted only to ESOPs. I mean, the whole thing, the whole construct is linked to the growth of the company. So even going beyond the narrow ESOP domain and saying how is the company growing, what are the prospects, communicating all of that also becomes important, and it's all part of the ESOP communication element of it. So continuous communication is important. Uh, to the extent possible, I think companies can also focus on education. I mean, we know that there are a few companies which have taken our help in terms of this process as well. But there are independent, sort of people like us on the market who focus on this domain. We also generate a lot of content. So even employees out of their own interest can access this content and can sort of keep themselves informed of what is happening when it comes to ESOPs itself. So it's education possibly is a combination of both the company putting in some effort to ensure employees understand this, and the employees also just making use of the available online resources and resources in the public domain to sort of just get their heads up on this topic itself.
Wonderful. That's great and good to know that education and communication go hand in hand, and it's not a sequential thing. And yeah, I mean, we are also seeing a lot of changes in the landscape as well. So I think it makes sense to keep us abreast of all the changes and be educated on those. So Vikram, on this, and many founders would be tuning in on here as well, right? On this, and they would be curious to know when does this journey of education communication start for them, right? Is it as soon as they incorporate and start hiring? Is it when they have the ESOP scheme, or at some point of the maturity? And like you kind of answered the question, but you can weigh in further on this. Like, is this more a one-time activity or an ongoing one, right? And again, you can share some of the instances from your experience here. Yeah.
So this is an area where a lot of us feel more effort has to be made from the company's side. So for a company which is not focusing on this, even doing something one time is good. But I'll talk about the utopian scenario. I'll talk about the best case scenario here. It is always best to keep this as a continuous process and to have a continuous element of communication and engagement, and to the extent possible, like I said, even education from an employee's perspective. One, it reinforces to the employees that the organization is taking ESOP seriously, right? And it gives a message to employees that we should also start taking this seriously, because we are hearing so much from the HR team, from the management, and from the founder when it comes to our ESOPs and ESOP plan itself. The other reason is that the focus and the lens shifts across a company's life cycle. To illustrate, when I'm at an early stage company, I'm probably setting up an ESOP scheme for the first time. The focus is more on education. Do my employees even understand ESOPs? Do they understand what I'm giving to them and the benefit which I'm providing them in the form of ESOPs? That becomes important. So communication of value, communication of growth potential, all of that becomes important. As companies mature, as they sort of go down that cycle, um, helping employees understand even elements of administration. So what happens when people leave the organization? How will they treat the ESOPs? How do I, let's say if I allow for exercise, how do I go down the path of exercise? So that becomes a critical element of it. Around maybe the Series C stage and beyond, that's when the conversation on liquidity starts getting important. So it's probably been like 5 to 6 to 7 years since the company started. There are probably people within the company, senior employees, who have vested their first set of grants completely. So now for those employees to actually start looking at, okay, what can I really get? It's been like 5 years in this company. what sort of monetization can I expect? How do I meet my personal liquidity needs? Can ESOPs help in this sort of endeavor? That becomes important. So at least like most companies don't guarantee liquidity, especially in today's markets, but at least giving a sense to employees to say what needs to be achieved and delivered to have the best chance of getting ESOP liquidity. That would be a good element to keep engaging with employees. And as organizations become more mature, as they have that comfort, some of them also, at least informally, set an expectation that there will be periodic liquidity events once every year or once every 2 years or so, where people will be given an option to exit. So then communication with respect to the right financial decisions on the employee side. How do I optimize for tax? How do I think about participation in these liquidity events? Should I participate now? Should I wait participate later? Where do I see the growth prospects of the company going? Is there a defined, do I have visibility of a big bang liquidity event like an IPO? Can I expect an IPO can happen? Communication of all of this becomes important, and that's what helps employees take the right decisions and help them hopefully maximize their wealth. And getting to a point where you're actually getting listed, where your ESOPs take on a completely different color, they become freely tradable in a sense. You can liquidate, you can monetize. Then the employees' decisions also change completely. So across various stages of the life cycle, there is a different message and there's a different focus on both the management side and on the employee side. And that's one more reason why this communication cannot be static. It cannot just be a very standard program or a presentation which you keep sending employees year on year, or you keep sending new employees. You have to keep reviewing this and keep changing this on a very periodic basis.
So that was super insightful, and I think you kind of covered a lot of the responses, like from stage point of view, from the engagement point of view. You want to touch a little on what kind of tools or what kind of ways in which you have seen. Again, these are like best practices that we see in the industry, and I mean we've come across various companies, right? Given that we manage ESOPs for them, and of course there is definitely a founder element sometime, which is overarching, and they go out of their way. Then there are some systems and processes, cadences. So you want to touch upon some best practices that you see both maybe from a education point of view and an ongoing communication point of view. Call out maybe on a no-name basis, call out some examples, and which will give ideas to both employees logging in here as well as founders as to how they should go about thinking about it in their own journeys.
So, from the education perspective, I think periodic town halls, either conducted by the company or conducted by third parties like us, make a difference. We have seen a few of our customers also ask for these yearly sort of town halls. So they just want to, sort of ensure that new joinees understand how ESOPs work, and what the construct is in the company itself. In a sense, these companies also are comfortable putting out a construct like that, because they believe that yes, if this sort of effort from our side results in at least a few of my employees being motivated around ESOPs, then my retention is better. So I think it's an ongoing exercise even for us at Qapita, but to actually boil this down to an ROI is something which we're working on, where we can actually say yes, with these education efforts, you can actually expect a certain ROI in terms of better retention, lesser amount you spend in terms of disruption, in terms of replacements and things like that. So that is one element of it. In whatever fashion, it can either be the founder covering it as part of the annual town hall, talking about the growth of the company, and drawing the right parallels to say yes, now we have grown, we have raised funding, our valuation has grown. This is how your ESOPs should have grown, share price has grown. This is how we plan to grow, and this is how you can actually expect your wealth creation journey to sort of pan out. I think that element of it, if it is brought out, I think that will be something which is very good for companies. Other than that, from an ongoing communication perspective, I think it boils down to engagement, right? Uh, to demystify and de-jargonize, the typical things surrounding ESOPs, to present your communication. And when I say communication, this can be your grant letter, this can be the way you are showing the ESOP policy, the summary of the ESOP policy itself, and more like a handbook or a primer or FAQs for employees. If all of this is drafted in a very easy to understand manner, I think that really drives that element of engagement. I think it is a challenge even for employees with financial backgrounds to go through like a 12-page, very dense legal agreement and try to be motivated by it. right? So some efforts there definitely will help. And like I said, continuous communication, right? So if I'm going through the ESOP life cycle in a company, for me to not just get the grant letter, right? Periodic, sort of notifications on vesting. Yes, you've gone through an element of vesting. Congratulations. Now you're richer by X, right? That is something which really may motivate me, right? Or to paint the picture on liquidity to say yes, we are planning for a large fundraise in the next 2 years. We You may have an option to potentially monetize at that point of time, and that is something which we can check with our investors, and we can see if that option can be created. Even if like these things cannot be put on paper, it cannot be a commitment, but even giving that sense that the management is trying hard to ensure that employees realize value on ESOPs, I think that gives a lot of comfort for employees that yes, this is a company where I believe I can sort of expect some, at least some returns on what I have, what I'm holding in the form of ESOPs. And to accomplish a lot of these things, I think using automated systems is best. Uh, because at scale it's very difficult for manual processes to support all this, from the HR team side. So we have seen people doing it manually where they had to hire one or two people just in terms of having this communication. And again, the nature of this communication is not something, it's not a very routine communication, so it's not like a payslip being sent to an employee. It does require some communicate, some element of like crystal gazing of sorts, which employees have to do jointly with management. It does involve an element of painting a picture of the future, right? So it has to come from the founder downward, and having automated systems to take care of this communication, take care of this engagement will really help in just reinforcing this with employees. So just some broad thoughts in terms of best
Right.
practices.
No, great. I think some of these ideas you suggested, like continuous town halls, continuous engagement from the leadership side, and using systems which also kind of brings in those cadences of communication effectively, right? And you talked about employees kind of bombarded with a lot of jargons, right? First time I think they're looking at a grant letter and a policy document. I'm sure they'll have more questions than answers. Like they might actually fathom how much my ESOPs are worth in some sense, right? And that's a question we keep get asked. So maybe one is because a lot of employees might also be listening to it now or even later, as this video will be live on Qapita, LinkedIn. So you want to touch upon some key aspects, and I know it's not a decoding ESOPs kind of a webinar, but if within like 2 minutes, if you want to talk about the key aspects employees need to really know about whenever they get their ESOPs. You want to touch that briefly?
So, just very briefly, and again, I'll approach it from an employee who probably has not received ESOPs in the past, who's not very familiar with ESOPs itself, right? But understanding the key aspects of the grant, right? In terms of, okay, what is being offered to me, how many ESOPs, uh, what is the strike price, right? What is the fair market value of the company at that point of time? And for me to be able to compute and attribute a value to it, to say, yes, today I have received ESOPs which in aggregate are around 10 lakhs. Now I'm going to be vesting it over the next 4 years or so. At least to have that number to say this is what my ESOPs are worth today, right? The guidance as to what the ESOPs will be worth tomorrow. So every employee holding ESOPs have to ask themselves, okay, now I've got something today. Am I listening to what the management and what the CEO and what the founder, what they say? Where can the company get to, right? What are we shooting for? Is it in the next 3 years we want to go for a Series B fundraise and maybe get to like a $50 million valuation? Is that the goal? That is the case. What will my ESOPs be worth at that point of time? That is something which employees need to understand. So very very just simplifying it in a very crude fashion. What is today's value? What can tomorrow's value be? I think employees need to understand that. At a broader level, not just from the scheme, but just from the way the company is running the ESOP program. How is the company thinking about it? Are my grants, is it like time-based sort of vesting, or am I getting grants, or am I eligible to get grants which have a performance condition as well? How is the company thinking about ESOPs? Are they going to give me fresh grants every year, or is it more of an ad hoc? I just get an initial set of grants, and that's a value creation journey which I'm seeing. And what is the message at least which management is talking about from a liquidity perspective, right? What is the threshold and what is a milestone which we need to achieve as a company before we can start seeing some returns on the ESOP? So at a very base level, I would say these two, three things are things which every employee
Right.
should understand. Some of it is available in the grant letter. They probably have to understand it. Some of it is more of the way company communicates it, or these are conversations which they should ideally have with their reporting managers and maybe even with the founders of the company, and to really like just get a sense of how their ESOP journey is going to
No, that's wonderfully put, I guess, like three or four crisp points you mentioned, right? Um, just continuing on that, right? So I think two things that a lot of employees will be concerned during the journey, right, while they have received their grants, is one is how much value it is. So one you just mentioned that how much the value could be. So of course it's an assessment when they're getting the grants. But as they go through the journey, as the company scales, one is the value creation itself. So how do you communicate it effectively? And the other angle is tax. Like, the moment there is a liquidity angle linked to it, or I think even before liquidity, I think if you choose to exercise, there are implications on tax. And many employees, I have personally seen a lot of my friends, they might not be aware of it when they received the grants, and then suddenly, they realize they have to, allocate some tax, when they choose to exercise, right? So, where do you see communication coming in? Of course, use of systems also, right? So, both on this communicating the value and maybe talking about the tax angle as well.
So, communication is one element of it. It's also how companies structure their ESOP programs
Right.
to manage this tax element. So, just
Hmm.
starting from just the basics of how the taxation works. Uh, the taxation event in India and a lot of other jurisdictions arises when employees exercise their ESOPs. So, I can get an ESOP. The grant can come to me. I can hold, go through the whole vesting period. I can hold my vested ESOPs. I don't have a tax liability. The tax liability hits me when I exercise and actually convert that vested ESOP into a share and become a shareholder of the company. So the decision points for an employee, and again, I'm covering this to give a sense of what companies typically communicate and what choices they give their employee. At an early stage, it doesn't, sort of make a lot of sense, or it doesn't make any sense to for employees to exercise and hold shares, because unlike a listed company where there's a ready market for these shares, I can sell the share, I can meet my tax obligation, and have the cash flow to do it. In an unlisted company, there are restrictions on transfer of shares, and even if there are no restrictions, there is no ready market for these shares. No one wants to,
Right.
just be a random minority shareholder in an unlisted company unless there is a certain angle to it. So in most cases, I will not be able to monetize what I'm holding as shares. In which case, I'm going to be going out of pocket on my taxation. And this is perquisite tax. The difference between the value of the shares as on the date of exercise less what I'm paying to acquire the share, which is basically a strike price. I get taxed on
Right.
my slab rates as if it is income from salary. So, in cases where employees, without knowing all this, have gone and actually done an exercise, the reactions they have given is to say, you know what, I thought ESOPs is going to result in cash flows for me. I never realized that ESOPs is going to actually drain cash flow. So, some sort of negative reactions have come from employees as well.
Right.
The common practice at a lot of early stage companies is to restrict exercise. So even by out of lack of knowledge, employees should go down the path of exercise and discover that they have a huge tax liability. So the message given to employees enshrined in the ESOP scheme of the company is to say, don't exercise. We will give you a reasonably long period to hold your ESOPs. So
Hmm.
you can have a vested ESOP for 5 years or 10 years from the time you're actually your last vesting sort of happens, and that should give you enough of an optionality to wait for a liquidity event. So please exercise only when you have visibility of liquidity. So we will notify you if you are creating options for
Right.
employees to liquidate their ESOPs, and that is when you guys can exercise and you can sell, and at least you will have the cash to pay the tax and meet the tax obligations. So you're not going out of pocket in that sense. So this is a very standard construct at early stage companies, but companies revisit this construct at a later stage. So once the company is fairly large, maybe Series C, Series D, they are able to give some visibility of liquidity or some visibility of a listing or an exit event happening at some point of time. Then the company may actually want to allow the employees to take a financial decision and optimize tax if required. So these companies may remove the restriction on exercise. They may tell their employees that, okay, if you guys want, you can go ahead and exercise. You will pay tax today, on what is the fair market value of the shares today. But if you are able to hold your shares for more than 2 years, then and then have an exit and then have a liquidity event, then the tax treatment for you for the wealth creation from today's value to the value 2 years hence is going to be a lot better. It's going to be taxed as capital gains and long-term capital gains if you're holding it for more than 2 years. The best outcome comes if the company actually gets listed, in which case it's like a 10% sort of capital gain. If not, it's 20%, but still would be lower than the highest salaried slab of 30% plus surcharge for a lot of employees. So companies actually allow employees to optimize their taxation. So from an employee's perspective, it's a decision as to, okay, how much confidence do I have that a liquidity event will actually happen? And this again is subject to the vagaries of the market. So if it's an IPO, the markets have to be conducive, market sentiments have to be good. The founders and the investors need to get the valuation which they want. Only then an IPO will happen. Delays may happen, because of your SEBI review process or for any other reason. So even in companies which are scaled up, which probably have taken the decision to go public, it's not that I can sort of say with 100% certainty that it may happen this year or next year or something like that. So that's a risk which an employee is taking, but some employees may be willing to take that risk to say that yes, why don't I freeze the value today, pay my 30% tax on whatever today's value is, and I'm very confident that this company will go for an IPO, if not this year, next year, or the year after, and I'm willing to wait. But I expect a good element of wealth creation, value generation to happen from today till the date of IPO. And when the company goes public, I'm sure it will be hotly subscribed, and I can expect to see like a listing gain of whatever 20, 30, 50, 100% as well. So if an employee has views like this, is willing to take the risk and put up the tax upfront and wait for 2 years, then the company actually says, let them do it. Right now, we are fairly large. Now, we also believe that our employees understand the implications of the decision that they're taking, and we'll help them, sort of educate them on the decision to be taken. But if they want to optimize their tax, then let them actually do it and let them become shareholders. So that's how taxation
Right.
in a nutshell works. Now, from a company's perspective, to empower their employees, right? So one, to take the right decisions with respect to either restricting initially, maybe removing the restriction at a later point of time, but to help their employees take the right decision, to say yes, if you guys want, you can exercise now. Be aware that you're going to part with cash today and pay tax, and liquidity may happen this year, next year. It may take 1 to 2 to 3 years. But as management, we are doing our best to ensure an IPO happens. So as and when an IPO happens, you will get a better tax treatment. Now take a decision. Do you want to do this or not? So to really help employees understand this and to give them the choice, I think is the onus of the company to do this.
Got it. No, this is very helpful. I think you gave the enough context on the taxation, and then also how should companies or employers deal with it or communicate it to employees. I think there's an interesting question from Kruti here, and I think this we have seen also, right? Like there are vesting period is 3 year. I'm assuming it's a 3 year vesting, and if employees leave in 2.5 years. Again, there are two cases. Maybe Vikram, you can touch upon all the possible cases here, and we also see how companies are becoming more friendly in these cases, by giving more frequent vesting, etc. So, why don't you touch upon this particular case and what's a good practice and what is in the interest of the employee?
So yeah, again, there is a spectrum to this. So you can choose to be very, very employee friendly, or you can choose. I won't call it employee unfriendly. You can choose to just be maybe more on the side of the company and on the side of the continuing employees. So that's one way in which I can sort of present this.
Right.
So one is to say that yes, the employee is not complete to the entire vesting. uh, what are your vesting intervals, right? So if you have a yearly vesting, then if I am this employee, then I am only entitled for two of my three installments. My third tranche of vesting is not going to happen because I was not employed in the company at the end of 3 years. So uh, you can't change something which you've already given out, but the way people think about their ESOP and their vesting, of late, to make it more employee friendly, companies have started a more aggressive vesting sort of schedule. It used to be very standard, used to be yearly vesting, typically of 4 years so far. But of late, we have seen new age companies, especially tech companies, do quarterly vesting, monthly vesting. We even have one customer doing daily vesting using our platform, but that's probably a little bit of overkill. But monthly or a quarterly vesting could be one way in which Management also signals to employees that, you know what, you're not going to be shortchanged. You will get ESOPs to the period, to the extent of the period which you work here. So if you work for 2.5 years, then yes, if you have a monthly vesting, you will get 2.5 years worth of ESOPs. Maybe you lose 15 days, right? Or if it's a quarterly vesting, maybe you might lose 1 or 2 months worth of vesting. But in a 4 year, sort of period, that is still a little bit of a smaller problem, right? Uh, so that is one way in which people approach vesting itself. Now, what are the options available to you? Again, the typically ESOP schemes are structured where management is given a lot of leeway in terms of deciding on some of these things. So, if you believe that yes, I have a very good employee, that employee, he or she is leaving because of personal exigencies or because of events outside their control, they ideally would have liked to stay back and they have contributed significantly for the period they've been here. Can the management take a call to say, you know what, you have not completed your 3 year vesting, but I can possibly accelerate and I can give you your entire entitlement at this point of time? That is possible. In most cases, the scheme will allow you to do it. That is a call which management can take, and the good practice is to just document this and to just have it as a policy as well. To say if it's an exceptional performer, someone who's got greater than 4.515, and that their employee is leaving because of reasons outside his or her control, then the management may take a view of accelerate ESOPs and offer it. Even if this is not like a very hard rule, I think to have a benchmark here from HR perspective will be important. But that is a call which companies can take. The one element which companies cannot violate is that in India there's a minimum 12-month leave. So if it's 2.5 years and I'm doing a vesting of 3 years, that is fine. If the employee is leaving in 6 months or 9 months or 11 months, and even if I want to do one tranche of vesting, that is just not possible in India. So exceptions are made only in the event of death or permanent disability. So that
Right.
is something to keep in mind, but this is one way in which you can manage it. Now, post the employee leaving as well, uh, like I said, if you are restricting exercise, if you are linking exercise to a liquidity event, it is customary to give a long exercise period, even for ex-employees. So something like 5 years or
Right.
7 years maybe a good thing to do. But there are other companies as well which take a more traditional view here, and they say that if you are leaving my company, then you're not eligible to be covered by my ESOP scheme. So you have to take a decision on your ESOPs within 30 days, 60 days, or
Hmm.
90 days before you complete your notice period. You can either exercise, become a shareholder, and I will treat you as a shareholder for the remainder of your association with me, or you have to lapse your ESOPs. Now, this was a very standard practice. I would say maybe 5 years back, 10 years back, but and this made a lot of sense in a listed company construct because the employee can
Right.
always exercise and sell. But in an unlisted company
Correct.
where there is no opportunity to sell, it is perceived to be a bit employer unfriendly and harsh. So, but again, we have seen both sides of it, both sides of the spectrum. Hope that answers.
Yeah.
I think a question
No,
from
that
Devendra.
that's very. Yeah, yeah, and about MSOPs and ESOPs, and he says vesting periods favor and more favorable terms. But yeah, we don't know. Actually, it can work either way, right? So maybe you can decode. And MSOPs are also thrown a lot as a jargon. So maybe you can decode that also. Are they a different instrument or are they? Yeah, go ahead.
So, yeah, so these are more terminologies, and I would say the way we describe it, there's no legal, sort of distinction as MSOP and ESOP. Uh, Having said that, as far as let me cover it in a couple of cases, right? If you intend for an MSOP to cover key management, who are employees of the company, who are not the founders, then legally speaking, there's no difference between MSOP and ESOP. It is the way you structure it. So in a company, I can structure what is called as an MSOP program and say that this is for my key management. And the way I may think about it is to say, okay, I will put in performance conditions. The quantums which I'm going to talk about for my ESOPs is going to be a lot higher because my key management will probably ask for a lot more on the ESOP compensation rather than cash. And you can make a distinction and create a separate ESOP scheme which covers the broader population. So that is one way the distinction can be made. But if you are using the word MSOP to say ESOPs for founders, then that is something which requires some discussion because an ESOP scheme as defined under Indian regulations cannot cover the founders of the company or any director holding more than 10% equity stake in the company. Uh, the exceptions for this is if you are a recognized startup. So if you have got DPIIT registration, you have that certificate to say that you're a startup and you are covered under the definition of what they call a startup. A company which is less than 10 years old, has not crossed 100 crores in terms of revenue. In that case, you can cover founders and directors in the ESOP scheme as well. So in that case, I can actually give out ESOPs to founders, but I have to ensure that when the grant is being made, I am a recognized startup and I hold a valid certificate of registration. So that's what the law says. So to that extent, yes, ESOPs can cover founders as well, and you can create like a founder ESOP sort of construct if you are a DPIT registered startup. Now, if in the event you are not DPIT registered, there has to be other structures which you have to explore to give founders an equity upside. So this can be like a phantom stock, stock appreciation right sort of a program. This can be like just a transfer itself, right? So maybe investors want to incentivize the founders of the company. They can transfer some shares, hold it in a trust or an SPV, and the founders get entitled to these shares. So there are a lot of tax implications. There's a lot of sort of structuring required to ensure that this is done in a clean fashion without having any additional cash flow or tax impact. So that is a little bit complex, but it is possible. It is possible. Many cases there have been profit sharing arrangements, and investors say if we achieve a certain threshold return, we are happy to pass on some stake to the founders as well. Or if founders achieve a certain milestone, then they are given some stake. You can structure it as an ESOP if you're a registered startup, but if you are not, you have to look at other structures for it. So other than that, differences between the two is the way the company defines it. So like I said, intuitively, I can say maybe an ESOP should deal with larger quantums of ESOPs, should probably have performance conditions because you're dealing with senior employees. You should hold them accountable for performance as well. Maybe have a slightly longer vesting period as well, could be 5 years instead of 4 years. An ESOP can be structured differently. So hope that
Got
answers.
it. No, wonderful. I think that's quite comprehensive. There's one more question on the chat. This is Ankit who talks about how do you tie in tax implications and manage the cash flows for cashless exercise. So I think maybe we can talk about the cashless exercise, and you can throw some light on it and how tax and some of the cash flows get managed in that case.
So I'll cover it from an Indian context. So to achieve cashless exercise, one needs to have an SPV or an entity, what is typically called as an ESOP trust. So if I have
Right.
an ESOP trust, uh, the way the trust works is that as compared to doing it directly. So if I don't have a trust, if an employee wants to exercise, at the bare minimum, employee needs to pay the strike price of the ESOPs to the company. It's only when the company receives the strike price in cash can they hold a board meeting and can they allot the ESOP, can they allot the share to the employee. So the tax also can be deferred. So most companies will ask you to pay the perquisite tax as well, because they will need to remit it to the government as as part of the TDS obligations. But even the tax obligation, you can defer it for a period of time till the 7th of the next month. But I can't even issue the share to the employee until the employee actually remits the strike price to me as per whatever is at the grant letter. Now you can avoid this and make it completely cashless for the employee if you have a trust. So the way the trust works is that instead of the company issuing a fresh share each and every point of time employees come and ask for exercise, when the ESOP scheme is instituted itself, the company will issue the entire quantum of the pool and have the trust hold these shares. So the company sets up the trust, funds the trust, and if it's a pool of, let's say, 10,000 shares, I issue 10,000 shares today to the trust. And in all the communication, I will say that the trust will administer my ESOP scheme. So whenever employees come for exercise, it is not going to be a fresh share issuance. It's going to be a transfer of shares from the trust to the employee. So ultimately, employee holds the shares, becomes a holder of the shares. So employee gets what he or she wants. But because it is a trust handling it, the sort of requirement to hold a board meeting, to involve other investors, etc., is lower. The trust can be just the key management personnel of the company, and the trust can also take a call to say that the sort of strike price can be remitted later, and the tax can be remitted later.
Right.
Cashless makes a lot of sense if you're considering a liquidity event. So that is when you actually talk about cashless to say that, like I'm going to get net proceeds. I'm going to get proceeds from a sale. So there is an investor who's willing to take over these shares, and net of my strike price and the tax, I'm going to get a certain quantum. The employee will say, like, can I not just get the quantum? Why do I need to pay strike price and things like that? So using a trust, you can make it cashless for the employee. So the trust will deal with the investor. The trust will be the holder of the share, sell it to the investor. The trust will be authorized by the employee to do this. Trust can actually collect the proceeds from the investor, back out the excise price and the tax, and remit the net proceeds to the employee. So that's the way a trust structure works. That's how the trust can make cashless excising.
Great. Thanks, Vikram. That was really helpful. Hopefully, Ankit, that answers your question. Of course, if you have further questions on cashless exercise, we can definitely take it offline. And we also offer these solutions that Vikram just elaborated. So, Vikram, maybe we were towards the end of this. So, maybe the last question that I had was, we at Capita also, offer some of ways in which communication can be made more effective, education can be made more effective. So you want to just touch upon some of those as well and leave it with the audience, and of course we'll love to engage with anyone who's interested to know more about it.
Absolutely. So I talked about using automated platforms. So a lot of what I covered in terms of periodic engagement, communication to employees, and helping employees understand the wealth and the value creation for themselves. I think it's something which our platform does. So maybe I'll just can I share my screen? I'll just quickly
Yes, you can.
one second. Let me just share. So I'm just showing you like sort of a quick look at how an employee dashboard looks like. So as employees log in, that element to say your ESOPs today are worth a certain quantum. In this case, like 78 lakhs. From the time you actually join the company, how much it has grown. All of that can happen on our platform itself, and you can actually see how we are able to help employees, take the decision on this, or to run scenarios on this. So the last round valuation of the company was 22,000 rupees. So that is why my ESOPs today are worth 78 lakhs. But I expect the company's value to grow in the future. So if I expect that the company will at least grow 2x by the time in the next 2 years or so, then what are my ESOPs actually going to be worth? How much have I invested? How much remains invested for me as of today? So this is something which we can, sort of on a very real-time basis showcase to employees. So rather than having, the periodic interventions to actually get this done, you may give them access to a platform like this, which actually helps them simulate this value, run scenarios. Most importantly, understand the opportunity cost. So the moment I know that there is a value to these ESOPs, then I know that yes, if I'm getting another offer from another company, then I'm going to lose a good portion of this 1.5 crore if I'm going to shift to that other company. So it helps you in your retention as well. And we have several other widgets to sort of showcase how every grant of the employee has accreted in value. So I've got grants at the early stage of the company that has grown like 10x for me. I have got grants just last year. The company's become larger, so the growth is not going to be as high as of this point of time, but it will grow as time goes by as well. And we have a fairly innovative, sort of construct called an equity payslip. So this is like a salary payslip. It's like a PDF document which a system can generate, can send to ESOP holders, just to increase that element of engagement and reinforce the value to the holder of the ESOP. So to actually say that I'm as Zoya said, I'm holding 127 ESOPs at a certain value today. Since the last time I got this payslip, equity payslip, a few things have happened. I've done more vesting. I've got more grants. This is my vesting journey. In the current month, I'll vest another 6 ESOPs. But all my ESOPs have come to me only 500 in the company as of 2026. This is how the share price of the company. This is how it has moved over time. So across the last few rounds of funding, this is how the share price has got to where it is today. And with this share price, with my vesting schedule, what is my worth today? So where have I got to from today's perspective, from the time I joined the company? We can extend these lines as well to say, okay, this is my last round valuation. I expect to do another round at, let's say, 1,500 a share, and then I do an IPO at 3,000 rupees a share. So if that is my growth path as a company, how does an employee, how is the wealth creation for an employee going to pan out? So this line also gets extended to say, yes, by the time we actually go for an IPO, your ESOPs potentially may be worth like 1 crore or something like that. So this is just something fairly innovative which we have just to drive home that engagement point. Apart from it, we have a lot of resources as well, which we sort of use to just on our website to help employees understand more about ESOPs. We're actually working on an initiative specific to employees. So while we work with companies, HR teams, and finance teams, we have more of an education initiatives for employees, where they can actually access resources and they can get a sense of what is going on. in the ESOP world in some sense. So that's just a very
Right.
sort of brief element of how we intervene in these things.
Great. No, thanks, Vikram. And yeah, equity payslip really looks cool. So yeah, I'm sure a lot of companies can kind of benefit and really take the communication to the next level. I think there's again one question from Amol on what's MSOP. In a way, you answered it. So MSOP, like Vikram mentioned, is management stock options mainly for the senior leadership or the founders in some cases. Again, it's more a terminology than actual legal instrument, as Vikram mentioned. You can maybe rewind the video after the live is done, and you can definitely listen to more on MSOPs, etc. So great. I think there are no pending questions, and we are kind of hitting the time limit as well. So that was a wonderful conversation, Vikram. Anything you want to leave with? If there were two or three things that you would want founders or employees to take away with regard to ESOP communication, what would those be?
So I think periodicity and continuity is very very in a short way, if I
Right,
can put it out that. Please think of this as an
right.
ongoing sort of process from your side, and that is what is is required to actually get the maximum benefit of your ESOP scheme itself. So,
Wonderful. That's a good note to end. Thanks a lot, Vikram, for sparing time and talking about this very relevant topic, I would say. Thanks for everyone tuning in and all your questions. So yeah, keep the effort on communication and engagement with your employees going. And if you need any help to do that better or to do it using systems, you can always reach out to us at Qapita. So on that note, thank you for joining all of us, all of you, and have a good day.